up. We've got 3 members there. So we'll open up and then we'll wait a few minutes before we get started, okay? Everyone ready?
Yes.
Beautiful. All right, team, let's go. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just waiting for a few more people to step in from the waiting room. So please take a moment to pause, maybe grab a tea. I have my chamomile tea beside me, and we'll start our webinar in just a few moments. Hello, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Today, we are going to move into advancing inclusion in the workplace, and we're doing this through an amazing opportunity today. We will focus today on how leaders can share the responsibilities to foster inclusivity, with management, the board, and as well with other team members. It is wonderful to have each of you here with us today. So please feel free to take a moment to introduce yourself into the chat as I run through a short introduction myself and a few of the logistical pieces for today's webinar. Today, I am joining you from my home in Calgary, Alberta, Treaty 7 territory on the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and Métis Nation. I'm holding space for my learning journey, and I'm building my knowledge and strengthening my respect for reconciliation and my part. My part is more than offering a land acknowledgement, but it's growing my understanding of the Indigenous history, hurts, and to be part of the healing journey, and to actively build an inclusive and caring future of peace, friendship, and understanding. Joining us today are community foundations that operate from coast to coast to coast. While we may be connecting from different locations, I encourage you to remember that we all have a responsibility to acknowledge the land and the original peoples of that place. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you take a moment to consider your own connection to the land and the original caretakers of where you live. I do appreciate each of you. You continue to invest in yourself as leaders, and you continue to explore ways to strengthen your foundation and how you can align and strengthen your team. So again, welcome. And we are deeply grateful you're able to join us for today's webinar. So just to go through a few housekeeping items as we get started, we are in a Zoom meeting mode. And this allows for us to have some dialogue with our presenters, as well as to have some conversation as a team. So please keep your microphone muted during the presentation, and there will be an opportunity to have some discussion later on in today's webinar. And if you do have questions throughout the session, and we love when we see the questions pop up, please do pop them into the chat box. We will be incorporating and collecting your questions for a short Q&A at the end of today's webinar. This session is available in both English and French, and to access the French and English interpretation, you will see a globe at the bottom of your screen. So if you click on that globe, you can switch between the English and the French version. You will also have an opportunity to access our slide deck today in both English and in French. At the very top of your screen, you will see the view options. And if you click on the arrow beside it, a panel will appear. So just under the shared screens, you will be able to select to view either the English slide deck or the French slide deck. I am absolutely honored now to move into today's webinar. I am pleased to introduce you to someone that's very dear to the Community Foundation Network and to many community foundations throughout within the individual work that she's been doing with foundations and with communities. Today, we're pleased to welcome back Ruth Mojeed Ramirez. Okay, Ruth, I practiced this just before I came on. Please, Ruth, tell me.
It's Ramirez.
Ramirez. I now have it. I have that entrenched. Ramirez. Ruth, thank you. Thank you for that. As many of you are aware, Ruth is the Chief Equity Officer for the Inclusion Project. The Inclusion Project aims to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in Canadian society by actively engaging partners and decision makers, both through research, knowledge development, but also as well community. In her role, Ruth's research, engagement, and solutions design focus, and it is an intersectional and intergenerational approach to address complex issues of race, decolonization, and gender equality. Ruth continues to lead organizational ready strategy and development and coaching among multi-level stakeholders, both in the public as well as the private sector. Ruth is also joined by two community foundations members as well, who will be introduced shortly by Ruth. Ruth, it is absolutely an honor to have you back again with us today. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to teach us and to help us to further our shared goals of equity. Ruth, I'm very honored now to turn the meeting over to you.
Tracy, thank you so very much. And I can't tell you just how elated I am. On the other side of the summer, of course, on one hand, trying to hold on to every last bit of sunshine, because I'm sure as maybe everyone in the room has been experiencing, the winds are blowing a bit longer and it's getting cooler, but still trying to take it all in, and also the reflections. I hope like myself, some of you have had some time to really enjoy spending time with family, really enjoy some repose, some refreshment, some refreshing over the last summer months. And as Tracy mentioned earlier, just taking the same words to echo the appreciation to all of you for continuing to prioritize this, for continuing to invest in yourselves like you do. And my gratitude also goes to the CFC team, as led by Tracy, Carlton, Kelly, and the rest of the team, understanding how much work goes in behind the scenes to ensure that we can continue to gather like this. I am deeply grateful for the opportunity. So many things to be excited about, in part because, of course, we're just coming back from a few days of sunshine, but also to introduce, as Tracy mentioned, our speakers for today, our guests for today, the people that we've actually come to listen to. For those who may be joining us for the first time, it's our practice, and I see that's already ongoing in the chat. If you want to share a few words around, what are you bringing into this space today? As well, where are you joining us from? Just along the same lines as what Tracy was doing, I will be going into land acknowledgement, but also really recognizing that very often it becomes something that we do because it's expected, or it becomes more performative than anything else. If anything, I think it's important that we take the space at the beginning of this conversation. Please use the chat function while we try to embrace even the limitations of technology, for you to share where you're joining us from today, as well as, if there is a piece of history, if there is a piece of wisdom, of insight that you're bringing with you, whether directly from the land, from your recent introductions with the people who make your life fuller and more robust on the territories that you're joining on from, or whatever it is that you want to bring into this space today, we'll totally appreciate that. I think it was mentioned earlier as well, still embracing the limits of technology and everything that comes with. As much as possible, we want to ensure that we're able to hear from you throughout the conversation today. And as well, for those who would be watching this after now, you can still send in your comments, your questions as we continue on in this journey. So throughout the conversation, recognizing that some of you have already sent your questions in, if anything pops to mind as we have these conversations, please feel free to use the chat function to do that. So again, reflecting on where we are coming from and bringing you greetings from our team at the Inclusion Project, our home, where we are duly registered, and what is really giving us that launching pad as an organization, as a group of people, is the lands, the unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, otherwise known as Victoria in British Columbia. And the work of the Inclusion Project really takes us across different parts of Canada, and increasingly, as we relate to different communities, even around the world, understanding that there are some commonalities and some common threads in our experiences that bring us together. So that is me. My name is Ruth Mojeed Ramirez, as was previously mentioned. So much more that we can share around everything that's enabled me to be here today. But again, it's a journey, and I'm grateful for the opportunity today to reflect on the experiences of others that have provided me the opportunity to be joining you today. So what is our discussion today? As always, as usual, I will try to capture a few things, just provide some anchor themes around this notion of building a culture of accountability and how leaders can advance equity and inclusion in the workplace. But more important than the slides that I will be sharing in front of you is the lived experience perspective that our two guests, who you'll be meeting very, very shortly, will be sharing with us. But just a quick, I guess, walk through the pages of these slides. We'll be trying to cover and capture what is accountability, what are some of the building blocks necessary for building a culture of accountability, how do we measure accountability and organizational culture, as well, how do we carry this forward, how do we sustain culture of accountability. So let's get right into it. A culture of accountability is one where people are intrinsically motivated to take responsibility for the result of their actions and the outcomes of their goals. I think that's really self-explanatory. And I think given what our audience is, given the kind of work that we do within communities, I'm sure that this concept is not one that is in any way unfamiliar to you. So if anything, we're just doing a quick refresher. We're just trying to ensure that we're all on the same page. Accountability substitutes for time and effort that would otherwise be spent on micromanaging unproductive behavior. Hence, the importance of building, of cultivating that culture that ensures that we're able to work together more cohesively, as well more productively, because everyone understands intrinsically what responsibilities they have to building, to working towards our common goals. Benefits of building a culture of accountability: of course, it improves integrity, because there is a shared onus, there is a shared sense, a common sense of, hey, we're working together towards something, and everybody builds something, brings something to the table. Hence, promoting transparency across the board, increasing productivity, discouraging wastefulness. It also encourages shared responsibility, improves efficiency and performance output, as well as increasing openness and feedback across all levels within foundations, within community organizations, and other types of organizations. Again, not to overflog this, because this is something that, of course, we're familiar with. And myself, much like I can imagine, much like the rest of you, I am really looking forward to the practical, insightful reflections that our guests today will be sharing. So what are some of the elements that need to go into building that culture of accountability? Transparency, of course, setting clear expectations, and one would say that comes with setting clear boundaries as well. Responsibility sharing, measuring set goals, activating feedback mechanism. That's really, really important because often in the work that I do with organizations across different sectors, really, often it becomes, you find that organizations tend to default to having some initial communication around here's what we're trying to work towards. Here are some of the desirables that we have, but not having that cyclical process where we're checking in from time to time. We are inviting and encouraging members of the team to provide feedback as they go. It's also really important to manage change collaboratively. Anyone who has worked on some form of project or the other in this space knows that it can be challenging. Change comes with all sorts of challenges, and the way organizations are structured generally, it becomes it's just a natural expectation that there might be risks that we need to manage. There might be changes that we need to, work through together. Building for the long term. It's really important that we're thinking from a lens of sustainability, celebrating progress. And I'm sure that our guests will be sharing a bit about, what that journey around celebration, why is that important? Why do we need to measure progress as we go? Measuring organizational culture. I know you will get these slides after now, so I'm just gonna touch on the headlines and then we can go from there. It's really important as a way to measure that we're modeling accountability, that there are set times and structures around how we organize reviews, collecting data, analyzing those data, communicating outcomes of those, engaging employees, teammates through and through, as well as incentivizing productivity. Again, the need for us to measure and celebrate progress as we go. And then how do we sustain a culture of accountability? Of course, we've already touched on some of this. We need to define the expectations in the workplace. We need to set SMART goals. We need to set goals that are measurable, goals that are time-bound, that are actionable, and all of that. We need to monitor progress consistently. We need to have set times. What is not measured does not count. Responsibilities and roles that are not assigned really do not yield any outcome. So it's really important that we set standards around how we monitor and measure the progress or some of the deterrents that we encounter through and through. Incentivize and encourage commitment, communicate consequences, show leadership and initiative. And this would come from anyone across the board. So whether it's board members, it's leaders or management within foundations, or just anybody who's got that onus for, whether it's assigned or just has that onus and that drive to see more of a culture of cohesion. It's really important to model that. Acknowledge and take responsibility for mistakes, encourage continued feedback. And now at this point, the real part of this conversation that I know that we are all looking forward to. I'm very pleased at this time to welcome my dear brother, Jaba Kofi, who is the Grants and Community Initiatives Manager at the Vancouver Foundation, and Nneka Otogbolu, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Equity Advancement. Of course, some of you who have been on this journey with us through the years will remember that Nneka has previously been part of this conversation. And I'm also very excited to welcome Jamba today. But I'm learning this culture or this practice of not taking the words out of the horse's mouth, proverbially speaking. So I am going to, over the next minute or two, invite Nneka first, and then Jaba, if you would like to take a few words to introduce yourself, share a bit about your work, and we'll go from there. Nneka, please.
Thanks, Ruth. Hi, everyone. My name is Nneka Otogbolu. I'm joining this meeting virtually from the Treaty 6 territory, city Edmonton. And my journey with the Edmonton Community Foundation started in March 2020, a week before the world shut down to the pandemic. And moving um, from BC to Edmonton was really, really exciting at that time for me. Got to meet a lot of my colleagues virtually, got to get to know the lay of the land based on the city and the work I do, also virtually. Met a lot of people virtually at first, and when the city opened up and I was meeting people for the first time, it was a very funny encounter for me, because sometimes I'll be like, "Oh, you're taller than I thought, and you need to do something about your chair or your office space or something like that." But it was good building relationship, building trust within the community, and getting community excited about the work ECF is doing and the impactful work we're hoping to do in the community was a good learning opportunity for me as well. So I'm glad to be back here again, and I'm hoping to share my experience with you all.
Thank you so much for that, Neka. And in the spirit of, I guess, assigning or locating people by what we perceive versus reality, I have to mention nobody has ever told me upon meeting that I look taller. It's never been my lot in life. But on that note, Java, would you like to share as well? And again, thank you so much, Neka. Really pleased to have you here with us today. Java, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, and thank you so much, Ruth, for inviting me. My name is Jaba Kofi. I'm joining you today from the traditional ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam here in Vancouver. Vancouver itself is located on the Coast Salish territories shared between the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. Yeah, I've been living here for 6 years now. I came here as a university student and fell in love with the city and the lands. Vancouver is really beautiful. If you haven't been, please come. And yeah, I'm also getting used to this Zoom world. Nick, unfortunately for me, I always get, "Oh my God, you look exactly the way I imagined you." So it's always like that. Yeah, I work at Vancouver Foundation. I've been there for a year now, and I manage grassroots granting initiatives mostly. Enable small grants for those of you who might be familiar, and I'm also creating other like grassroots granting strategies that we might adopt sooner, like in the next couple of years. So it's exciting to be here to talk about accountability. Ruth knows me because we serve like the Inclusion Project together, and through all my work, the way I serve like community, accountability is a huge part of what I'm always trying to emphasize. Because without a culture of accountability, then who are we? We end up repeating history over and over again. I don't think the conquistadors or like the initial settlers were accountable to anybody, which is partly why the world we are living in is what it is right now. So yeah, I just wanted to like put that, like sprinkle that a little bit into my introduction, because I think that's where I'm coming from. When you are working in community and you are serving community, accountability is one of the values that I think everyone should uphold. But I will stop there. I'm pretty sure Ruth has a lot of questions. No,
No, Java, I think that's fantastic, and it's an excellent segue to where we wanted to start this conversation. You already kind of hit it on the head around why it is important, why we need to think about accountability through and through as we consider our work with community foundations. But what exactly does that look like? And I don't know if I'm asking for a definition here, or if you want to share instances where you've actually seen it in practice, Jabba, just along the lines of what you're already describing in terms of how this is important. What exactly does accountability or the culture, building a culture thereof, what exactly would that look like in practice, in operation within your community foundation, for instance? You're muted.
Yep, there you go. The Zoom fan. You're muted, you're not muted. Can you hear me? Yeah, so I can briefly, like, I have a few things that come to mind. And I would like to use the post-George Floyd phenomena as an example, for instance. You know, like after George Floyd, end of May 2020, middle of the pandemic, we heard a lot from businesses and community foundations and all sorts of organizations who are making all sorts of promises to Black-led or Black-serving organizations. My organization, Vanco Foundation, being one of them. When you look back, like 3 years later, so little of those promises that were made have actually materialized, whether it's in terms of funding support that, big organizations, big businesses were promising Black-led and Black-serving organizations, whether it's in like structural support, capacity development, and all that. And I think I tie it back to the lack of accountability. So I wanted to first define what it's not before I can talk about what it is. My thinking around this is, if I'm like the CEO of an organization, or we as the board of an organization say, okay, we are going to do this, and we post it on our socials, put it on our website, great. But who is monitoring? Like, what structures are in place to ensure that we deliver those? You talked about feedback mechanisms. Who are the organizations, the Black-led or Black-serving organizations you're affiliated with, who can provide us feedback on where we are doing it right, where we are doing it wrong? What's our circle of trust? Like similar organizations in our work, or individuals like us who can actually be able to say, no, that's not what you should be doing. So at the end of the day, it becomes very easy to like overpromise and not deliver at all, because all these things are lacking. So that's one of the things that comes to mind when I think of that culture of accountability. If there are no clear structures of who takes the lead, how the work happens, who provides the necessary support or resources, etc., like there is not going to be accountability. So wherever there is less meekness and there is more clarity, then like teams, individuals, organizations can be more accountable. In my own work at Vanco Foundation, like I've seen this with the Neighborhood Small Grants. It's a program that's been there for 24 years now. So that's a long time to evolve and become really solid. And my predecessors, they have established clear structures of who takes the lead on what, who reports, who makes the granting decisions, like the communities who are making the granting decisions, who are the coordinators in each of the communities we serve across British Columbia. And because of this clear clarity, you can always say when something goes wrong, okay, it's Njaba's fault. Or before something goes wrong, the coordinators can come to me and say, hey, Njaba, we don't think the grant management system is working.
Right.
What can we do together? We are entering a budgeting season right now for the next year. I am going to be holding accountable the regional network coordinators whom we are working with in their various organizations as they submit these budgetary items, like for us to discuss and have that conversation. Okay, the work that happened the last year, like this past year, versus the work that's going to be happening the next year, how does that look like? So these clear structures and this really intentional clarity,
Right.
that trust that's been established, that partnership that's been created, it's what promotes like good accountability. I'm going to stop there.
That's wonderful, Jabba. I really like how you went from like the big level. Let's talk about the world, the reality as we saw it about 3 years ago, and some of the promises that we saw plastered everywhere, and what the reality has become, and then you delved into some of the reasons for some of the gaps that we've experienced. Nneka, what is your take on accountability, and how practically has it been operationalized within your foundation?
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Jabba, for sharing that context and the overarching theme and how we got here. It's kind of similar, because when the issues are complex and we serve different communities, but some of the same issues can be translated to the Edmonton community. So to me, accountability is the responsibility and answerability of my community foundation to our internal. So when I say internal, I'm looking at the employees, the board, and our volunteers, and then the external stakeholders that we serve. And the external stakeholders would be the donors, the charities, and also the wider Edmonton community that somehow the work we do affect, either directly or indirectly. It's a responsibility and answerability of our actions, decisions, and the outcome of our work in the community. So that's my take on what accountability means. And it's important in the work we do, because as a community foundation, we need to be open to feedback and learning. I'll give you an example. As the Jabba had mentioned, the George Floyd incidents, we also passed through a time when we had that incident happening, protests all across the countries, across the Northern American space, and also locally when we had the discovery of the graves in former residential schools. There was that sense of community hurting. And a lot of groups and organizations had made pledges, had made commitments, not just to community, but also to the employees. I saw some creation of some support groups in organizations, in community as well, that was supposed to serve and, help get information and know what the needs and pressures are in community. We launched, at ECF, we launched a grant stream we called Anti-Racism Grant Stream. And the initial target was to organizations that were led by and serve Indigenous and Black communities in Edmonton. It was a lot of learning for us. The first couple of months when the grant streams were launched, we had 0 applications. I have talked about this for a while. And people would ask me why it's that. It was because we had made the buzz around, created the buzz, reached out to community. But I guess at that point, we hadn't known what the issues were that was hindering groups from applying for the grant. So we decided to do a bit of an outreach and reached out to communities, held focus group conversations. The peculiarity of the pandemic and the world shutting down at that time made it difficult for us to physically congregate, but we could do that virtually, right? So we called virtual meetings and we asked questions. The structure of groups, the fact that there was that conception that community foundation wouldn't fund certain things was aired. And what we did was to listen. We listened, we learned, we had to be vulnerable, right? And we had to also understand that our role in the community was to serve. We understood the power imbalance between funders and community, and we decided, how do we start bridging that gap? We took feedback back and sat down internally and talked about ways we could also reimagine that grant stream. Initially, the grant stream was a stopgap. It was this is what is happening now. This is the way we could react swiftly to this emerging issues and realities. But as I speak with you right now, that grant stream is still existing. because the issues have morphed. And we need, as a community foundation, to be able to understand what the changes are and also have them reflected in our services and our programs and our initiatives as well. So it's not called the anti-racism grant stream anymore because it caused some confusion within the community and internally as well, because it was perceived as funding for anti-racism work. But it wasn't. It was ECF's anti-racism work in the community.
Right.
And so we now call it the BIPOC grant stream. It gives us an opportunity to have one-on-ones with community groups to actually learn their work. We did try to incorporate some parts of our trust-based philanthropy. So we had run that stream before the trust-based philanthropy was a term that was widely known and talked about. And when we looked at what the principles are of trust-based philanthropy, we could map it with some of what we're currently practicing.
Right.
The work we do is constant learning and the ability to receive feedback from community and seek to improve our practices, based on lesson learned, and evolve with our community is what will make us sustainable as a community foundation. So that's why accountability is important to the work we do.
Thank you so much for that, Nneka. What I really appreciate from the perspective yourself and Jaba have shared is you didn't just give us definitions as if we're just going through some slides or reading from a textbook. Obviously, you've lived this out, you've experienced it, and Nneka, as you also highlighted some of the gaps that may exist in perception and cause some challenges along the way. But this then leads me to the next question of, some of the glowing ways you both have described why it's important to have a culture of accountability, how it improves your ability to actualize your objectives overall and fulfill your mandates and all of that. What are some of the reasons you think organizations generally, or more specifically, community foundations, may not be embracing that form of accountability, or whatever form of accountability is relevant for their own context? What are some of the challenges and obstacles that you think exist to prevent organizations from fostering a culture of accountability? Nneka, you first, and then we go to Jaba.
One thing I will share that I can actually relate with is inadequate resources and support. For instance, I remember when we launched the BIPOC grant stream, or the anti-racism grant stream, now called the BIPOC grant stream, we had, the plan we had was to be able to collect verbal applications. And so that meant we had to meet one-on-one with groups and take in applications, write it down, put together a memo that is circulated for approval. We were able to just do that as much as we could with the lean resources we had. And at the end of 2021, we did sit back to ask ourselves, is this sustainable? Was it beneficial to me, to the team, to the organization as well? When we reviewed what we had at the end of the year, we decided to give organizations the opportunity to actually submit a request in any form. It doesn't have to be verbal, it could be a proposal, but we just earmark maybe 3-4 points that they should put into it. And that would help us make the decision. So I think inadequate resources is one of the challenges. Another one that I've seen is the cultural resistance to change. Like when people are used to doing things in a particular way, and you ask about other opportunities to do things differently, there's always that, oh, why this has worked for us. Why are you bringing in this new way of doing things, or new ways of seeing this? So yeah, that and resistance to change, and I would say clarity of roles and responsibility. When I started this job, my role was the Director of Communications and Equity Strategy. Two very distant departments, but on one person. There was more questions around why the role was merged and what that would look like in the work I did, and how that interplayed with other departments. It took time to, look through it and have conversations internally. What we had was a situation where departments were functioning in silos, but the fact that I wore two hats, and one that had that could be mapped into the work other departments did, gave us the ability to actually reduce the siloedness of the work we do, and for me to have an idea of what every department was doing and how they were doing it and why we were doing it in the way we were at that time. So I think lack of clarity in roles will be a common challenge that will prevent organizations from fostering a culture of accountability, and finding ways to navigate it will be a great thought that we should be looking at. It's something that we're currently also dealing with right now, and it's beyond meeting regularly. It's beyond having meeting maybe once a week or once a month to share updates. It's about the operational work we do as teams, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And, if I'll just add on to that, and I think you already mentioned it, I think part of it is also recognizing where the expertise lies, whether it's internally with people who have different lived experience that will be relevant to what we're trying to build in a very time-sensitive manner and relevance to our context as well, or externally looking to support and experts who may be external to the organization, but maybe are able to bring and share insights that really steer us in the direction that we need to be going. Jeff, I'm just going to flip the question to you a little bit and talk about this question of modeling, because I think you hinted at it at the beginning, talking about how historically we've missed that mark around building a culture of accountability because the structures and everything weren't in place originally to model that. How would you say, in your experience, how can leaders and managers set the right tone? As well, the flip side to this question, or the other side to this question, is how do you balance this question of accountability and fostering or building an environment that supports productivity overall? I know those are two heavyweight questions, but I trust you to provide as concise and just, on it response.
Wow, no, you gave me all the big questions, Ruth. I appreciate that. So like just my understanding of your questions, the first part is modeling. How do we model that culture of accountability? And the second one is?
How do you balance accountability and productivity?
Accountability with productivity. Yeah, those are big questions. The very first thing that comes to mind for me, especially within the philanthropic cycles, it's moving away from self-interest. And I have to qualify this before I even say anything else by saying I'm very biased towards communities. I come from a culture of advocacy, advocating for community needs, and for me, it's often weird to see how, as a youth advocate in different cycles, like trying to challenge these offices with power dynamics, I was treated versus being on the other end where I'm with the largest philanthropic, the largest community foundation in Canada with so much resources and so much power. So seeing that contrast and wondering, can I treat the Javas of 4 or 5 years ago a little bit differently? So that's the bias towards community, and everything that I'm going to say henceforth is coming from that bias. So the first thing is moving away from self-interest. If we really want to model that culture of accountability and actually create productive teams, we have to move away from self-interest. And self-interest in philanthropy, for me, looks like privileging what the donors want as opposed to what the communities want. Most of the times, because we do need those dollars to top up on our endowments or to create those grants. And sometimes you are going to do things that please the donors at the expense of doing things that the communities want. So we need to cultivate that humility in how we engage the communities we serve. The second thing, flattening the power dynamics as much as possible. And I'll give an example, like from Vancouver Foundation, we just had a big lift granting more than $28 million, I think, to communities across British Columbia through the Recovery and Resilience Grant, which is a collaboration between Vancouver Foundation and the province of British Columbia. And, like, of course, we are still doing evaluation and learning to see what went well, what went wrong, where can we improve. This was the biggest single granting call that Vancouver Foundation had ever done in its 80 years. But you see, when you take the province of British Columbia and you take Vancouver Foundation and its leadership, and then you take all the 3,000 plus qualified donees and unqualified donees who applied for this grant, it becomes a huge mess, because where the power lies and what those decisions are being made to actually serve the communities. And what I learned through the few conversations that I was involved in, because this was not directly my portfolio, just through support and being a fly on the wall in some of those meetings, it can be really hard when you're accountable to the government, you're accountable to the leadership of your organization, but you also want to be accountable to the communities. So if we want to model that culture of accountability, I think putting the interests of the communities first should be a priority. And I did see this where some of the teams, we did these validation calls. We tried a whole bunch of things with this grant, and one of them is, spending an intentional hour with a community applicant as opposed to requiring them to fill 20 pages of application forms. A simple application form, and then you follow up with a conversation for those that actually made it into the second round. So really flattening that power dynamics, I think, is going to help model that culture of accountability and increase that productivity, because when there is that proper alignment, work is easy. The third thing, also related to actually the lack of clarity that Neka was talking about, is effective communication. You read any legal documents. I actually challenge everyone on this call and whoever is going to do watching the webinar, find any legal document and try to read it, or better yet, any terms and conditions from any of the websites that you interact with. Try to read that and see how much of that you understand. You're serving can't even understand what you're trying to communicate. We can't really be accountable to them because there is too much confusion, simply speaking. And related to that, when in our teams, there isn't effective communication, who owns what, who does what, who is accountable to who, then you can't really create that culture of accountability, and it gets in the way of our productivity. So those are a few things that come to mind in relation to those two questions. But the one last thing, which for me is always the overarching amongst all of them, there are some people who are trying to maintain the status quo, knowingly or unknowingly, to keep colonial practices alive, to keep racism alive, to keep marginalizing and excluding. And when that's happening within our organizations, it's definitely hard to actually model that culture of accountability, or even have productive conversations that lead to productive work. Yeah, I noticed within Vancouver Foundation, in the past 2 years, we're talking a lot about diversity, about anti-Black racism. It's unprecedented. And when you look at these conversations happening and actually everyone is engaged, you see interest in doing something and actually being accountable, in giving regular updates in about the work that's going on, about the changes that are being implemented to make sure that the organization is better serving Black communities. In this example, same thing with indigenous communities. With some of the granting calls that you're putting out right now, because there is that intentionality in trying to dismantle the status quo and move away from all these practices. So we model a better culture of accountability when we do like intentional listening, as Neka was saying, and really interact with these communities we intend to serve with the view that we want to learn, not that we know it all, or we know everything. We have the money, we have the capacity, we are going to give it to you and do A, B, C, D. No, like cultivating that humility and moving away from that self-interest and really engaging the communities in a way that dismantles the status quo.
That's wonderful, Jabba. I could not have said that any different or better. Thank you so much for that. Neka, as we're now wrapping up, because we mindful of people's time, we need to leave right on the clock, on the hour. I would kind of direct this last question. Overarching theme around this series is, that idea of building trust, how to sustain trust, how to maintain trust, how to even initiate it with the different communities that we serve, for some of the reasons that have already been mentioned, because the trust was never there in the first place, or it's been broken over time. How do we do that linkage between accountability and sustaining trust with the different communities? Again, that partiality to community here with the different communities that we serve.
For me, I will say, we need to make clear terms, communications very clear to ourselves and the community we serve about where we stand in what we do. I could share an instance with you, and it's good, or it's a great idea to have that communication documented, because sometimes that's going to be the focal point for a lot of references that will guide the process. In 2018, ECF carried out an equity audit of our small and community grants. So those are discretionary dollars. And it was a 360-degree audit. So the grantees were audited, the employees in the grants department audited. And part of the recommendation of that project was that we come up with an equity statement that would guide the organization. I tell you that I've referred to that document, and it's public facing, it's actually on our website. And we have 5 action items that we hold ourselves accountable for. And action 5 was that we will continually seek community feedback on the equity statement and review the statement annually and release a yearly report on our progress, towards increasing equity, both internally and externally. And sometimes when I work and I ask myself, myself or my team members, that are we on the right track? We go back to the equity statement and we look at it. And on the statement, we actually define what we know, or we think, or we want to see as being equitable. So set the definitions clearly. Everyone sees it and understands it. There's no room for ambiguity or misrepresentation. And then we have those guidelines guiding our processes across all departments, either donor services, finance and admin, and grants department, communications, and even my department, strategic initiatives and equity advancement. So having a reference point documented, public facing, clear, is a good way to start the work. We've had a lot of community foundations reach out as well to get information of how we built this, where we're hoping to go with this. And we so happily share everything, even down to the contracts with the external consultants that did the work, because putting them together was intentional too. We didn't work with one organization. We got a collaboration that was put together, a collaborative group that was put together to do the work. So as I'm speaking with you, I'm looking at it, it's on our website. And throughout this conversation, I did refer to it a couple of times, just looking to say, hey, we actually did have this. We also have opportunities internally to also get our staff trained and up to date. Right. Because information, as we say, knowledge, we are continually learning. We learn every day. I've learned from this engagement. I've learned from you and Jabba throughout our conversation. And yes, that would be my bit.
Thank you. Thank you. A very big thank you to both of you. Sadly, we have to kind of bring it all together to a close now. But just as a refresher of what we've heard, Neka, you were just saying it's really important to have that anchor point, something that we keep going back to as our reference. And Jabba, you said it really, really clearly. Let's eliminate self-interest as we work to build something that's meaningful and sustainable for the communities that we serve. It's been such a pleasure and an honor to share this time and space with both of you, as well as the CFC team today. And with that, Tracy, I'll pass it right on to you, because I'm sure there's a lot that still needs to be shared.
Ruth, thank you so much. And I want to express my deep gratitude to you, Ruth, for leading us through a very important conversation. This discussion today was, I'm going to be very open with you. It brought us to a different level. I'm really understanding that sense of accountability and our responsibilities in building not only a healthy organization, but it's a culture of a healthy, accountable organization. And so really do appreciate the leadership, Ruth, of you guiding us today. You know, as I think about that sense of accountability, it's critical to have a healthy organization. And so being healthy also means collaboration. And all of our members today spoke highly of that. And so, you know, Nika, Jamba, I want to make sure I say that correctly. I want to share with you your knowledge of sharing from your experience in being part of a community foundation is absolutely critical for community foundations that are with us today, because you are living it. You are sharing your lived experience. And by sharing with these beautiful community foundations that are working hard to ensure we're building equitable communities, and that equality and equity is really key for them, you've shared your lived experience. So we speak of lived experience in our grants. We're doing it today through this session too as well. You know, as I think about going forward, something that came up for me is around how to continue to be curious, how to continue to monitor, how do we continue to be clear whose role is what, how do we continue to be clear on sustainability, how do we ensure that as we move forward, we are modeling accountability in everything we are doing. If it's inside within our organization, but also as well as discussed today, external with our stakeholders, and to be accountable. So Nika, I did share your equity statement in the chat so that others have the opportunity to see it as well. And Jamba, I want to share with you your leadership and what you've done within the province of BC on that funding model that you noted, plus the tremendous work that's being done throughout the Vancouver Foundation is also is very much impacting the communities and the citizens of BC. So Nika and both Jamba, thank you so much for being part of today, part of that shift, part of being a guiding light to help us all move forward. So, and I'd like to express my deep gratitude for everyone that's also joined us today. We didn't see any comments or questions come up through the chat, but as Ruth mentioned earlier, this is a conversation that doesn't end at the end of the webinar. This is a conversation we'll continue to entertain as a groups through our equity work, but also as well, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to any of our panelists today, if it's Ruth, if it's Jamba, or if it's Nika. I know they're always available, and I speak openly on that because we share. That's part of what our network is. We do have a quick poll, so would like to hear from you. Oh, Jamba, thank you for sharing your email address. Do take a moment before you sign off to provide us some feedback through the poll that is up at this time. And we also invite you to join us for future events. The fall is here. We are now moving forward with the fall curriculum that Caltoon and many others have spent quite a bit of time on designing that is reflective of where you are as a community foundation leader. So do take a peek at our website on our events page. Please opt in for our newsletter and follow the events that are being posted in our newsletter, which is coming out now to you every 2 weeks, so that you have the opportunity to stay in touch with where the events are and the resources available to you. We do have a great webinar next week, or one tomorrow, pardon me. I don't want to forget. We have one coming up tomorrow that's also maybe of interest for all of you, and that's on advancing your journey in gender lens investing. So please don't hesitate to sign up for that. Apologize. When your Mac computer is hooked up to your Mac phone. Apologize for that. As well, we also have next week another webinar that maybe as well be of interest to each of you, and that is controlling toxics for our health and planet. Both of these are going to be phenomenal webinars, so I invite each of you to join us and to stay in touch with future events that are up and coming by following, again, our newsletter and as well our events page. So as we close off today, take care, everyone. Hope you can take time to pause, enjoy the moments that are presented to us as we watch fall present itself to us. Take a moment to enjoy that gift of connecting with nature. And please stay well. And thank you again for all that you do. Take care, everyone.